For those of you who have seen my other panels, anyone, maybe? No? Great, okay, thanks. Just a reminder, this will be up on my YouTube page, Spiro Vision Productions, just like all the other ones for free, no commercials in case you want to revisit or take a look at the material again. Thanks Ray Jones and Kyla and Jerry for the recording and making that happen. Let me introduce you to our panelists and then we'll get started. Douglas J. Eboch is a screenwriter best known for writing the original screenplay for Sweet Home Alabama, starring Reese Witherspoon, which set a box office record for the biggest September opening that stood for over a decade. He co-wrote the Felony Melanie prequel novels that tell the teenage adventures of the characters from Sweet Home Alabama. And he's also written for the original novel Totally Rad Wormhole, as well as video games, plays, and has had short stories published in magazines such as Amazing Stories and Science Fictionary. Doug is the author of The 3 Stages of Screenwriting and co-author of the Hollywood Pitching Bible, which is a great pitching Bible, by the way, if you've not read that and are interested. Please welcome Doug. Next is Eric Heisserer. He is most known for the film Arrival, adapted from the Ted Chiang Story of Your Life, and Bird Box, the film from 2019 based on the Josh Malerman novel. Eric has also served as showrunner for the Netflix series Shadow and Bone, adapted from a novel, and has written and directed Hours based on his own short story. Simultaneous, his debut novel, published in October of 25, has been selected as the November Book of the Month by Belarus, earned a starred review by the Library Journal Review, and won the Audie Award for Best Science Fiction Audiobook of the Year. Please welcome Eric. Next is Jill Blotevogel. One of her earliest jobs was on the TV series adapting Stephen King's The Dead Zone. She also adapted the Scream franchise for TV when she created and show-ran Scream, the TV series for MTV. She adapted the novel The Killing Game for Hallmark Channel, and her most recent credit is the Lifetime movie Monster in the Family, which was adaptation of a book based on a true story. She's got all the adaptation knowledge that we need. Please welcome Jill. And Brandon Easton is an award-winning TV and comic book writer with a diverse slate of credits. He broke into TV with the Warner Brothers Thundercats reboot and went on to write for Transformers Rescue Bots, Marvel's Agent Carter, and Netflix's Transformers War of Cybertron. His graphic novels, including Shadow Law and Watson and Holmes, have won multiple Glyph Awards and earned an Eisner nomination. His other comic book work includes Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Judge Dredd, Star Trek, and Robotech. Brandon has adapted iconic properties from the Japanese horror franchise Vampire Hunter D and Iyanu, Child of Wonder, into a TV series, and co-wrote the action thriller Takeover starring Quavo. In gaming, he's written on Overwatch 2 and Hearthstone and Blizzard. Currently, he's adapting 2 graphic novels into animated feature films. Please welcome Grimm. Thank you so much, panelists, for being here today. For me, I'm your moderator, Spiro Skentzos. I've worked at both half hour and hour on shows like George Lopez, Grimm, and Arrow. I've sold 3 pilots. I think they were all mostly adaptations. And I wrote a web series called Chatham, based on a graffiti artist from the Bay Area. Yes, so enough about me. Thanks for being here, everyone. Just some housekeeping real quick to start. We'll do Q&A about halfway through, so please bring your adaptation questions. But just a show of hands, anyone has written or is writing something adapted? Okay, great. And anyone like to but haven't yet? I'm kind of curious. Okay, great. That's great. I guess we'll just start off in general, assignment aside. What draws you to take on an adaptation, and what do you see as the biggest challenge in kind of translating that to the new medium? I'll just kind of open it up with that question. Anyone? Yeah, Jill, jump in.
I've read books probably 4 or 5 weeks since I could read, and so I think what always draws me to a book is the voice. You get pulled into a character, you get pulled into this point of view in this story. And that is both the benefit of a novel, but it's also the challenge, because unless you're doing voiceover, which you're usually not encouraged to do by studios and networks, you have to translate so much of this amazing voice that drew you into whichever book you're reading, and find a way to make it more visual. So I think the voice, the narrator of a book is wonderful and a big challenge.
Yeah, Brandon?
I would also say finding the emotional beats of a story from the original material and translating it to another medium without the insult of exposition dump. That's really tricky, but it's a lot of fun. It's also a difference between taking graphic novel material into film and TV versus prose into film and TV. At the very beginning of my career, and this was even in Ain't It Cool News, back, if you remember what that was, back in the 1900s, I adapted The Man in the High Castle, the Philip K. Dick thing, but I changed it completely. It's nowhere near close to what they did for the final version that got made, but it was tricky to find emotional beats and stories like that. So really, it's what are the universal things that will hook you at the very beginning? Somebody's house burning down, Luke's aunt and uncle getting blown to pieces, planets being destroyed, rings being forged from evil people. There's always some kind of emotional hook you have to find, because you get a maximum of about 15 seconds to 2 minutes before folks start to, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Before you start to tune out and start flipping and turning from Lifetime to Netflix to Amazon Prime or whatever. So it's really finding that thing in the very beginning that's going to get you to not fidget on your phone or not want to, walk out to the movie theater, go to the bathroom early. All those, like Weapons is a great example of how you get people real quick in the rest of the movie. Even Conclave has a very interesting opening. So if you watch a lot of films, read a lot of books, Stephen King is a great example of how to get people early, especially in Carrie and the first Dark Tower book, things like that. So finding that emotional hook so people will stay. That's the challenge.
That's great. I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which was about like exposition and big info dumps like that. Because it's so different when you're reading the novel, you're like in the character's head and you're getting all that stuff. I was wondering if anyone else wanted to jump in about how difficult it is that you just can't take the book in chunks and put it into a script. Anyone have more thoughts on that?
When you're dealing with books that build entire worlds from scratch, and so everything is bespoke, it can be extra tricky because you have to educate your audience on the world at the same time as you're introducing them. But the advantage, I think, of making these kinds of movies and shows and adaptations today that we didn't have back in the 1900s was that there's a genre fluency now with the public. We're in a sort of a post-Game of Thrones world where people who didn't normally get into that kind of space now have a better sense of the vocabulary or the vernacular of those kind of worlds. And so when I had to get a lot of stuff through Congress at Netflix on Shadow and Bone about stuff where I didn't want to stop and hit the brakes and have somebody like turn into a TED Talk about how the Grishaverse worked there. My explanation was like, well, when you're watching a medical procedural with a neuroscientist as the lead, did you give them notes of like, I don't know what this medical term is? No, because you understand that the context of that allows you to get through that. So I think we need to stop like trying to define all of these new terms and roll with it as long as we understand the context behind it and the feeling behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a great element to bring up. Yes?
I'm going to flip the answer on its head, kind of, because we've been mostly talking about adapting books or some source material to movies or television. And I actually did the reverse-based screenplay that had been financed, and the financing fell through because of COVID, and so I turned it into my novel, Totally Red Wormhole, and there was one of the things I had to learn. I'd already written some of the prequel novels for Sweet Home Alabama, but really like, oh, there's no production designer and there's no costumer. And so now I have to do all of that in my prose to capture, which is not easy because of course it slows it down, but if you don't do it, there's not that context. So I think thinking of it that way is like different mediums bring different strengths from the medium. So you have to just be aware of like where you're gonna have to make up the ground. So like it's hard both ways.
Because when you're writing a novel, you are the director of photography and the costumer and the set designer and everything you don't think about when you're usually a screenwriter.
Yeah, screenwriters, we get to rely on other very talented people to some extent to help us with our world building and character building and all of that. And you don't have actors either, so I can just move my dialogue and put quotes around it in the novel, but like I don't have a performance to help deliver that line, so I have to figure out how to do that, which is actually maybe the hardest thing I found to do in prose.
Yeah. How do you decide what to stay faithful to and where you can or must take liberties? You kind of just touched on this a little bit, but especially when you're working with a producer or when you are the producer, if any of you have been in that position, working with a writer, what do you find that you want to stay faithful to from the book to the film or the video game to the novel?
I would say first, as an exercise, like a film school exercise, I would say watch every version of Dune that's been produced, starting with the 2 David Lynch versions, because there's the original and there's a 4-hour cut. Then you watch the Sci-Fi Channel one that everybody forgot about. Then you watch the current version and look at what each one kept and what each one left out. I did a comic series with IDW with a group of other writers called Star Trek Year 5, which was the 5th and final voyage that you never saw, but we heard about. It was a 5-year mission, right? So we walked into this and we knew that we had to get them from the end of the 1966 series to the beginning of Star Trek 1, the motion picture. And so we had to make sure we kept certain things. So you can't have Kirk and Spock going into a genocidal rage and wiping out planets. You can't have that. But you can touch on things about who those characters are that you may not have seen before. So one of the things that I did in it was I brought David, Kirk's son, that you hear about in Star Trek 2, but he was alive during the original series, right? Because Carol Marcus would have gotten pregnant during that period. So it's things like that that you can bring, but you cannot fundamentally alter certain key aspects of a character, or else the author or production company or the executive or whoever is involved, they may push back. But I would say when you look at certain adaptations, Stephen King is another great example. You see how many times the same book, whether it's Pet Sematary, whether it's It, especially The Stand, which has 2 versions, look at what they keep and what they leave out. So I feel like certain character motivations and backstories have to remain the same. What you do with them, as long as you're not violating the general concept of the book, I feel like you can get away with certain things, but not everything. But you keep the core, the heart of the character. It's like when they made the Gunslinger movie with Idris Elba as Roland. A lot of people didn't like it, but I felt like, well, it didn't really violate too much. It didn't really follow the Dark Tower, metaverse as much. So I feel like you can't always pick and choose, but there are key aspects of the character you have to keep and not violate, or else you lose the faith of the creator and potentially the audience.
Yes, I can speak to that in that when we did Scream for TV, we decided not to use the ghost face mask. And this was before Scream had been rebooted in theaters. And so the last image of the Scream ghost face mask to me had been from the Scary Movies, where it had been like, smoking a doobie or just really stretched out of proportion. And I was just like, I don't know that it's still scary anymore. So for the series, we made a mask that had a narrative purpose. It was, a character who was an urban legend who had facial deformity. And this was the mask he had to wear after the various surgeries to try and fix his face. And so suddenly we had a mask that was evocative of the original, but it wasn't the exact same. And some people appreciated that. A lot of people didn't.
I bet you people had thoughts.
They had thoughts, yeah. But, and then the other element that I transformed for TV is the meta speech that's given in the pilot. And so instead of, this is how scary movies work, I have a character saying, you can't do a slasher movie as a TV series. I mean, come on. These things run for 90 minutes. They run fast and furious. And he basically says everything that any skeptic of my taking screen to TV would say. And it was so freeing to have a character pointing out every pitfall that I, as the creator, could fall into, and then be like, but it's still going to be great, so stay tuned.
That's great. It's like leaning into that element,
Yeah.
I'll just beat you to what you think this is going to be, and we'll work from there. Yeah, that's great. What is you kind of just touched on this too, Jill, but what is one misconception people should have about adapting from one medium to another, especially for those who are out there who are new to adaptation and kind of learning how to navigate it?
You both, Brandon and Jill, brought up some really interesting examples in that they spoke about properties in which much material has been built for them, but they were telling their own stories in that space, which is different from a direct adaptation, I think what can draw you to a property in which you get to tell a story that you have ownership of, but you're using another character. You find characters as a vessel to tell whatever you're very passionate about, or in the year of our Lord 2026, which you're very angry about, I would imagine. And you find that they work as good mouthpieces to that because, what you're trying to do essentially is hide the medicine in the ice cream. You're going to deliver a genre story, but hopefully you've got something to say about it. I would say if you're doing a direct adaptation where you're essentially just telling the story of something that's already done in one medium and slightly transferring to the other, you're more a custodian than like a storyteller the way that Brian and Jill were. And art, sorry, but in the sense that you also need to find what you felt from it. How did it make you feel, and how can you protect that and sort of bubble wrap that in your transference from one to the other. And if you can keep the feeling the same, I think you don't have to worry so much about adhering to the aesthetic fidelity of the source material.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's great. Yeah, Doug?
Yeah, I think there's potentially a lot of different misconceptions, and it may be, project specific sometimes. But I would say that if I could say the biggest misconception is that because something works in one form, it's going to work in another form, and that somehow it's easy to do that. I don't know if writers ever have that misconception. Certainly executives maybe like, well, it's a video game's great, so it'll make a great movie. It's like, not always, things need to change sometimes. And I feel like kind of going back to your original question of, usually honestly I chose to work on adaptation because the job was there. But when if I get some chance to pick, it would be like, can I see a movie in this novel or a comic book in this movie or something like that? I have to be able to see it in the other form that it's going to work that way, because I think the assumption is, well, because I love this, it's going to be great as this other thing.
It's kind of like the adaptation for the series Halo, which no shade to it, watched it all, enjoyed it, but you could see how that was a difficult translation from the game, whereas opposed to, I just forgot the name of it on HBO, the zombie one, The Last of Us. Sorry. The Last of Us, were they really were able to pull that off, even though I had to check out once so-and-so was killed. Not to give any spoilers, but yeah. But those are really good examples of sometimes the video game doesn't translate well or easily into something that's strictly narrative.
I'll give an example. It's gonna be a little different maybe because I was hired to adapt a novel, and the novel was not a bestseller or anything like that. It was a novel on horse racing. I'll try to be brief about this, but essentially it ended with the Kentucky Derby, and the novel traced all the horses, which is 12 in the Kentucky Derby, and how they got there, and basically just too much, just common with novels. There was a core story, I thought was a core story, of a horse that was bred in New Zealand, and the jockey was a young Maori woman being a jockey, and Keisha Castle Hughes was attached to play the role. And I said, this is your movie. The other 11 stories have to go, but this 130-page section in the middle of the novel, that's a movie, and I can do that. And fortunately, the novelist was involved in the project, and had said from the beginning, like, I understand movies are different, they're your area of expertise, the novel will be there, do what you want with it. And I was still worried, I'm like, I'm actually talking about cutting out, 70% of his novel, but he was like, you're right, like, that is the movie. So, again, we didn't have the weight of like Star Trek fans or Grimm fans that were gonna come after us, but like, that was the thing, is like just figuring out like, how is this gonna work in a different form? What can this become?
Have anyone ever had the situation where you're told to adapt a book, but you can drop everything that's in the book, but just keep the supernatural element, but nothing else? Because I have, and it was an awkward thing, because one, I felt bad for the author of the novel, but there was a supernatural element, that's the only thing they wanted. And so I was like playing with the characters, and they're like, oh no, these characters are awful, just use the supernatural element, and then work around that and just create something. I was like, but then I can just write you something. Like, you don't need to, no, we really want the book, we think the book's great. So these are things that happen.
Yes, all the time.
I do want to open to Q&A for a second, but ask your question, I'll repeat it so that way it's on the mic so everyone can hear it, and just make sure they're project specific, that folks up here can't hear pitches, can't read samples. So if you're asking a question about something you're adapting, try to keep it very like on point and in the moment, and not a larger explanation of the world, just so that way nothing touches on anything that they may be working on. Anyone want to start off with the question? Yes, you, and then in the back, and then you.
So you mentioned about exposition dumps, and that's something you should probably avoid. But I recently read a science fiction novel where it was about a human girl who goes on a spaceship, and when she goes on the spaceship, all the knowledge of space is just uploaded into her brain automatically. And so now she knows everything, right, basically. So she doesn't have to, you don't have to explain anything to her. So how I'm trying to figure out like an example of a way you can get exposition out in a natural way like that.
So a girl goes into space, goes into the spaceship, and suddenly knows everything.
Yeah.
And how would you explain all that?
No, like what's an example of a way to get out exposition in a natural way like that?
Yeah.
I mean, Project Hail Mary did a great job of that.
Say that again?
Project Hail Mary.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and The Martian, well, both Andy Weir. Both of them did a really great job of putting very complicated information in front of you very quickly, and it made sense.
Yeah.
So those two were really good. I mean, it's really about watching a bunch of films. I mean, I wouldn't say Blade Runner 2049, no. But I think Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship did a really great job, even though it was narration, but you got to know about 1,000 or so years of history in about 5 minutes. And they dramatized that through an incredible battle. So I would just say, maybe in your specific case, 2001: A Space Odyssey on the ship, not with the proto-humans, with Hal talking to the astronauts, was a great way of getting information out. So you could have an AI, you could have an Android or something like that, like Prometheus, the Aliens prequel, does a great job of kind of tossing about that type of information. So those are, you got to have a blank slate character.
Yeah, like the Matrix.
Yeah, it's like the Matrix. Kitty Pryde in the first X-Men movie, because she's walking into that world alongside Wolverine. Wolverine is kind of the audience view into the mutant world.
Yeah.
All those kind of, always look for the character that's the blank slate that people throw information to.
I'll give you kind of an interesting example of that blank slate character, because that's definitely a good exposition technique, is Little Miss Sunshine. Which you may think like, well, there's not a lot of exposition, but they have the character of Uncle Frank, who is coming to stay with the family and doesn't know things like why the son isn't talking. So someone has to explain it to him. So like putting that character in there where someone who doesn't know and can kind of be the audience's surrogate. It happens kind of at all levels. A little conflict also helps people get exposition out, because they'll use things to defend their argument, but it depends what kind of exposition.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of like when you need that information, but you don't necessarily need to know all the stuff that got uploaded into the woman's mind until she activates on it, And so if the viewer of the adaptation gets to a point and she is repairing something on the ship outside the spacesuit, and they go, how did she know how to do that? Then you can demonstrate in real time what she's accessing. it could very well be whatever got uploaded to her mind occasionally shows up as hallucinations, like the astronaut that showed her how to do it is there with her and walking her through it step by step. So if you're getting a sense of how it happens, like, I'm not trying to pitch on this thing, but I don't think I would say, that's one way out to it. Another thing that you can do, particularly when you deal with a complex lore that you have to bring to the front, particularly if it's a history that characters need to know, you can make exposition more digestible if it's an argument. Just have two people, debating each other over what the history was.
Yeah, those are great. Thanks. Great question. Yes, you were back here in the black.
So, on the idea of this video game won't work as a movie, have you ever come across a source material that's like this perfect thing in a case that you can't adapt it, or have you maybe come across something that you didn't expect to work as well in the adaptation as in the original?
Have you come across something that is unadaptable, or have you come across something that surprisingly worked really well?
There's a lot that I think is unadaptable. I also know that that's just subjective, and there will be someone that comes along and proves me wrong eventually. But there are things that feel like they're built particularly for the medium that they're in, that, if you adapt it, you're taking a lot of liberties. You're like, just the supernatural element, like whatever, and I think that is I still don't like those people. But then I would say, I was obsessed with this game Blueprints last year. I loved it to death. Is that adaptable? I don't think so. Like it works as a puzzle game. Yeah, you will absolutely run it. I've run into those all the time.
Apparently, Mattel thinks a lot of the toys are adaptable films.
It's not really my story, but I have friends that have pitched on Pets, and they could not crack how Pets is a movie.
It writes itself. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and I'm kind of with them. I'm like, I can't figure that out. Maybe someone will, but they couldn't do it. So.
It's like a Mandalorian costume, your pets. There are some writers, some novelists who write perfect movies as their novels. I think Ira Levin is a great novelist who, I remember reading the script for Rosemary's Baby, and it was scene for scene, the same as the book, except for one scene that they cut out. But it was a perfect adaptation. Some people might say a slavish adaptation, but if it's written in an incredibly cinematic way, and it's a great story, and it's great characters, then that's when your job is like, okay, this is easy. And then the other 98.99% of the time, it's really hard.
Yeah, there was a question way in the back, and then we'll come back up to you.
Hi, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask, what is your advice to authors who want to break into the screenwriting space? For example, authors who want to adapt their own works. Because obviously, the book is different from the series, but when you look at authors like Jen Kahn, who Hollywood producers were reaching out to her, but they realized whitewash her main character, and she was like, no, I have to be the showrunner to protect the cultural fidelity of the story. And then now she's the showrunner of the summer. I guess my question is how do authors break into that space? Is it coming up through the writer's room? Because a lot of times authors will get executive producer credit, and they don't actually get to write the pilot or the screenplay.
Yeah, so the question is how do novelists, authors get to adapt their own and have some sort of agency in the adaptation process as a TV show being in the writer's room, right?
I would say that's very tricky. It depends on your circumstance. The show I was head writer for is called Iyanu. It's on Cartoon Network, HBO Max. The creator of the graphic novel, Royal Coupe, is Nigerian creator, and is based on Nigerian Yoruba mythology, right? When he got interest from a particular production company, he was able, in that particular case, to hang his hat on being an EP and being in the writer's room. But I feel like it's almost it's a roll of the dice, because in certain circumstances, depending on, for example, what following you have on social media, your cultural footprint at that time. Andy Weir, for example, The Martian, he self-published it, then it got made, picked up, and then it got made eventually. But that was a very long process. 50 Shades of Grey, for example, started as a Twilight fanfic that flipped into something very, very strange and different. It did well, I mean, I'm not trashing it, but I feel that when you're talking about that side of the business, you need a very specific set of circumstances to go your way when it comes to intellectual property law attorneys, your reps, and also how you deal with the executives and producers in certain situations. So I don't know if there's a one size fits all, because it's one of those things where you figure out a way out of the jail and then they brick it up. So you got to figure out a different way next time. So I would just say first to have something completed that you've already gained some sort of a following for. I mean, I believe it was Stephen King, I might be wrong, who said you only need 5,000 fans to have a career. So, who actually pay for things. I mean, not talking about just 5,000 fans. So the trick is get a following, and I think that social media cachet can help, push certain buttons that you wouldn't normally get pushed if you were just coming through your typical way. But it's tricky, everybody's not the same. So I would say first, just have something done that has some kind of following that people care about so that you can use the weight of fandom in your favor, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, also to add to that, Jill and Eric, like the more power you have in that negotiation gives you the more opportunity to be in the room, because you're not just gonna be able to step right into a writer's room and be like, I'm running the show, hey, what's up, right? Like you're gonna need some powerful agency to get in there. I mean, agency of your own, like you're in a good position, there's multiple bids or something that would give you the opportunity just to jump right into the writer's room and get started, right?
There's a lot of that. What often is pitched to me is they want to bring me in as an experienced writer to work with somebody who just wrote a novel or did a podcast that's very buzzy and everybody loves it. And then it's kind of like, I'm the wise Ben Kenobi to this young upstart Luke Skywalker. And it's, they take the benefit of my years of experience on set and in the writer's room, and then that helps this person learn how to do things. But yeah, a lot of times I've come across the authors in the writer's room, and there's definitely a learning curve, but we all learn how to do it at some point. Yeah, it is a lot of you've got a really good lawyer, or you've got such passion and vision that you bring to it, where they're like, he or she will pick it up, pretty fast.
And TV, there's a lot more apprenticeship going on in the writer's room, than there is in a novel. That's where you're mostly out there on your own. I'm with blue shirt, red shirt, and then black shirt, black jacket. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want a couple of things. One thing, and then I want to build off his question. One of my favorite movies ever made, and if you are interested in adapting stuff, I think you really ought to watch Charlie Kaufman's Adaptation. If you haven't seen that, you've got to see it. It's fantastic. But he won 2 Oscars as one author. But building off of the guy who wrote Ice Harvest, he wrote the screenplay first and could not get it anywhere. And so then he adapted his screenplay into a novel. The novel got optioned, and he was like, well, I already have a screenplay. And so when you're at the beginning of an idea, I have this idea that I want to try to do. I want it to be a movie, and I write screenplays, so I know if I did prose, it would just end up looking or feeling like a screenplay. It seems to me like going prose first is the real way to do it.
So the question is, if you basically want to get something made, you can take a screenplay, write it into a book, and then hopefully the book gets optioned so you can write a screenplay. This retrofitting of things is not uncommon. I don't know. I think even Eric at lunch today we were talking about writing books and having them optioned. So I mean it's the way to go. I mean they love IP, right? That's what was an adaptation panel.
I mean, if you start with a screenplay, though, you can still learn a lot from your story. You get to a place where when you adapt it, or you get a lot more elbow room that a novel provides you, you can start to do more in that space, or change some things that you found were a little problematic when you were, clunking around in the screenplay version. And what you end up with is something that informs a new draft of the screenplay once you're done with the novel, that you can, take back to market. So I would say both are absolutely positive ways, because you're writing. That's the takeaway here, is that you're writing something.
Interesting. The only question I would add, kind of like to both of the last two questions, is I think it's like, just don't assume you know how to do the other thing, right? Like, learn, if you're a novelist and you're gonna write a screenplay, learn how screenplays work. If you're going the other way, learn how novels work. Or in TV, I think maybe that's kind of what Jill is getting at in the writer's room. Like, there's a lot to being a showrunner that does not involve writing. So
there's a lot you don't want to do.
yeah. So know what you don't know, I guess, would be kind of, my advice, whichever way you're gonna go.
There's an episode of Family Guy where Brian the dog meets George R.R. Martin and pitches him this like multi-media franchise. And Martin's like, dude, I just was writing one story that I cared about. I wasn't trying to do all of this. So I would just say, at least have a passion for their original idea in whatever form and make that the best you possibly can. Reverse engineering one thing to another can work, but ultimately it's the story and the core of it all that people are really going to care about. So and I'm not saying you're doing this, but if you ever, just watch the George R.R. Martin episode of Family Guy. The whole thing is kind of
tells you everything.
Yeah, it's pretty much this whole thing. But I would just say stick to your best story. The thing that people are going to cry about or get angry about or, feel for, ultimately feel for. That's what you're looking for.
That's great, thanks. Yes, Richard, or Reggie.
So I'm in the writer's room currently, and they're adapting a old comic book property to bring it up to date. And you guys gave some great recommendations, so I would love to get your recommendations of things I should watch to help update this property for it, urban, graphic novel.
You're in a writer's room that's taken an older piece of IP, a graphic novel or comic book, and adapted it for series.
By urban, do you mean black?
Yes.
Thank you. Gotcha.
I mean, it's just kind of finding the modern interpretation of whatever's presented. It's like if your story is, set in a certain part of the country with a certain group of people, I'm always like, so what is that equivalent today? And sometimes that's affected by technology changes, by cultural changes, but you just, as long as you find, your jumping off point in your modern day version of it, I just kind of then jump into those shoes and follow them through. And if it's hard to say, not knowing which property.
Are there any series that you would recommend or movies that you would recommend, like reference, that have taken an old property?
Look at Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, wow. This is
Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet.
yeah.
Or
Thanks.
I mean, any Superman,
Spider-Man.
Any of the 30 Superman.
any of the DC that the WB did.
I actually think Captain America is kind of interesting because of just the change in, the idea, like it was a World War II comic, right? Like, and it was about that very specific time, and we're at a different time. And even if you look at, there was a great run in the 80s that kind of became Civil War, but to kind of like look at how Captain America has changed as the country has changed.
Yeah, that's a
But
good.
there's no more Nazis.
There's an old Russian film called Solaris.
Oh yeah.
He made with George. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to say the quality. I'm just saying that that's a good one. I think Watchmen. I felt that was unfilmable, and even though people hate on it, I think Zack Snyder did a fantastic, and the screenwriting team did a fantastic job bringing that to film. Then the HBO sequel, which was more of a sequel to the graphic novel than the original movie, really updated it with masked police going around doing stuff and fascist type situations going on. Those would be great, especially if you read the Watchmen graphic novel, which was a direct reaction to the Cold War, because Nixon somehow was still president in the 80s because of some stuff that went down. But if you look at how they pulled that off in the movie and in the HBO series, there's very interesting changes and very interesting decisions made. That would be awesome. I'm trying to think of other stuff because it's like, I can go old school and say Cooley High got made into the sitcom What's Happening. And and they're not similar because, Cochise dies at the end, but in What's Happening is a very silly, almost Fresh Prince of Bel-Air kind of show, but they were both set in an urban environment and they both move forward in a different way. And, you could also say The Wizard of Oz versus The Wiz. Joel Schumacher did do an interesting job with that.
That's a lot of examples. You wrote them all down? Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. Good answers up here.
Yeah.
Yes, over here.
So my question is, and you guys briefly touched on this, but obviously in adaptation you have to make some executive decisions, and sometimes you're jettisoning giant chunks of a novel. But I was wondering, what is maybe one of your boldest, sort of most scariest adaptation changes that you have to make on a project, that you have to convince the people that maybe even the writer or even the executives, this needs to change this drastically in order for this whole thing to work.
So has there been a big drastic change that was kind of jaw-dropping to you that you thought you would have to convince your executive or producer of while adapting the piece?
I think I told mine already.
I can kind of, address this. For me, the challenge of taking a movie franchise where it works perfectly and it's 90 minutes. You're meeting the characters, somewhere within those characters are the killers, somewhere are the victims, somewhere is the final girl. And then you've got your killings play out, and then she's sitting in the back of the ambulance as her friends' bodies are carried past. And so to take a format like that is so set and turn it into 13 one-hour episodes. I remember trying to explain to Bob Weinstein that it's got to be 3D chess. It can't just be introduce, kill, walk away. And so it was very hard because Bob was very steeped in the world of feature films. Somebody told me he's never watched a TV show. And so I was trying to teach him TV while he was incredibly protective of his franchise and his IP. And so it just took a lot of headbutting to figure it out, but we found a way to do it. But it was changing some deeply held mindsets.
Great, thank you. Yes, up here, and then here, we only have 10 minutes left, so let's get you, and who else? Okay, let's do it. Go ahead.
Considering how many books have been turned into movies throughout time, is there any book that you genuinely can't see becoming adapted into the visual medium?
Oh yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. Is there something that you don't see being an easy adaptation or can never be adapted? Is that what you mean?
I mean, specifically something that's from a written piece of medium, like a book, whether it just doesn't work in a visual medium like movies or games.
Is there a book that you can think of that?
There was a book that when I first got to Hollywood, the book Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester was the book that every A-list writer was trying to adapt. But for the last quarter of the book, it's written in letters that just get larger font and then smaller font, and it's very sort of kind of existential and it, under the influence, the main character's point of view. And I think the first 2/3 of the book can be adapted. I think if you're going to try and stay true to the book, the last third, it's just, you've got to just make a choice and go down a path and do that. And because this book has so many fans, you're probably going to piss someone off. But that was one that it felt like every couple of months there was some new screenwriter who had written a version of it to try and get it made.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, and the next one was you? Yeah.
Yeah, this question is to Eric specifically. Arrival is my favorite film of all time, so it's really cool meeting you in person. I guess it's 3 questions, but they kind of lead into each other, so I'm sorry. But the first one's, what made you choose the story of your life, and what inspired you about the story to make you want to turn it into a film? And then the second one is, how much influence did you have over the production design? Because I also read the short story, and the tent is very small, it's the scale of it's not very grand, but then in the film it's like this huge monolith, and they actually interact with it and it's much closer. And also like the hands, like the tree trunk shape, like did you think of that? And then the third question is kind of smaller. It's like, why did you choose to change the name Gary to Iyanu?
So questions about Arrival and how good you are.
Lots of other questions. I am happy to talk to your ear off afterwards so that I'm not like, monopolizing the panel's time with it, but sure, yeah. I will say the last one is something I can share with everybody because it talks about the nature of adaptation. And I had used Gary in the early drafts of this for a long time, and then one of my producers was like, no more Gary, I hate Gary, I hate that name, we're doing a name. And it turns out that like he had somebody who cheated on him with somebody named Gary. And I had to change the name because a producer had a bad experience.
You weren't expecting that answer, right?
That's amazing.
That's great. We have time for one more. Yeah, the white.
When you're adapting something and it's an existing IP that's got a lot of fans, does like a studio typically want you to lean into the fans and making them happy, or into new people and making them happy? Because I feel like a lot of times it's one or the other. You kind of have to try and work with one.
It typically depends on that particular studio's PTSD. Either they've gotten burned by it, they lean too heavily. Look, every studio learns a lesson from success or failure, but it's always the wrong lesson. And so, you'll come back and they'll say, well, it's clearly this. A good example is like with Watchmen, it's like R-rated comic book movies don't work at all. We'll never do one again because none will. And of course, Deadpool comes out. They're like, what? So that they're going to have their own mindset and their own trauma. They're like shelter animals sometimes. They just have terrible habits that you have to figure out how to navigate.
I also think it has to do with where you are in the lifespan of a franchise. If you are, for example, doing a sequel in the middle of a bunch of, following the predecessors, obviously, there's going to be different considerations at play and different pressures and expectations put on you versus kicking it off from scratch. Maybe a dead franchise or something that's been, people have been very angry about. And when you come into that scenario, there are a lot of different considerations at play. Doing a comic book adaptation is very different than, let's say, going from a novel to TV and film and so forth and so on. So I think that it's very tricky. It also depends on who your producers are. Because some producers have, for example, I'm adapting something right now. When I turned in my first outline, they were enraged. Turns out they never read the book. They read the pitch deck, but they never read the book. They were like, where are you getting this from? I said, the book. And they were like, oh. And then they read the book. And they were like, oh, it's, So, you never know what's going on with people. But I feel like it's not, again, one size fits all. It depends on what franchise it is, how much money they're willing to put into it, and what the potential considered market is going to be. What demographics are they going for? So those things, this is all the inside baseball stuff, but these are things that do actually come up in Zoom meetings, which could have been a 2.5-hour Zoom meeting, could have been a one-sentence paragraph, one sentence email, we could have solved it, but these are the type of things that happen. So it depends on who you are and where you are in the process.
I think that those are good replies to that question because there's a history of failed adaptation attempts of popular properties, including even the TV show V, which was huge in the 80s, which is all about fascism in the government. And it was redone it was 2001 or something by ABC, and they were forbidden to use the word aliens. They told the writers you can't mention aliens or anything, but yet they came from outer space. So, and it failed, it was horrible. And this is no offense to the writers did it, the writers were being twisted left and right to be like, no, not this, but this, not this, but this. And how do you live, how do you survive or thrive in an environment like that for the show?
I also, again, I wish I was telling more of my own stories, but this is a writer I know who was hired to adapt a novel called On a Pale Horse. I don't know if you all know this, but it's basically the Santa Claus with death. Like a guy's gonna commit suicide, death shows up, he accidentally kills death, and then has to become death. So my friend adapts this novel and turns it into Disney with the studio, and the reaction from the executives can we have less death? And he was like, and he figured out the same thing. They had never actually read the novel. Jamie Foxx wanted to play the character, and they just wanted to be busy with Jamie Foxx. So he's like, well, your whole novel is about death, so I don't know how I make it with less death. That project didn't go. So.
A different version of that very same story was like David Goyer in the early 90s, back when Marvel essentially would garage sale all of their properties to various studios. Universal had Doctor Strange. And Goyer got in and got that gig, and he did. You know, he was sent off to do that, and then he delivered the script to a new set of executives because there had been a change. And then the first question they had on the notes call was like, "Does it have to be magic?" And Goyer's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you wanted Dr. Mundane."
That is a great way to end. And we just got the stop sign. Thank you everyone for coming out. Please give a round of applause for the applause for the- Thank you.